Welcome back now for the news in detail. Latin America is still the epicenter of COVID-19 as Brazil recorded 1,141 deaths and Mexico reported 736 overnight. The Brazilian Health Ministry says more than 39,000 new cases were recorded in the past 24 hours. Globally, the death toll has exceeded 488,000 while the cases have crossed 9.5 million. More details in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has been raging in LATAM as the region reported the highest number of daily deaths and cases. Mexico pushed past 25,000 deaths and 200,000 confirmed cases, while in the US, the death toll has crossed 154,000 with nearly 40,000 cases reported overnight. The governor of Arizona urged the state's residents to wear masks but stopped short of issuing any new order.
Our time of getting hit is right now. June, July, and August. I don't necessarily like to put these terms on what's happening here, but these are common terms that are being used around the country. This is Arizona's first wave, and this will not be our last wave.
The death toll in Africa has crossed 8,800 with more than 337,000 infections. Meanwhile, the chief of the World Health Organization says the pandemic is subsiding in Europe but getting worse globally.
The situation in Europe has improved. Globally, it's still getting worse. In the first month of this outbreak, less than 10,000 cases were reported to WHO. In the last month, almost 4 million cases have been reported. We expect to reach a total of 10 million cases and 500,000 deaths within the next week.
Elsewhere, China has recorded a further decline in new cases with 13 infections in the past day. 11 were reported in Beijing, where mass testing has been carried out following an outbreak that appears to have been largely brought under control.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 59 people have died from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, taking the death toll to nearly 4,000. The Health Ministry said the number of overnight cases declined to 2,775 from yesterday's 4,000. The ministry said the country's infections tally now stands at nearly 196,000. It said over 2,800 people recovered from the virus in the past day, raising the tally to more than 84,000. The ministry said over 107,000 cases are active in the country. It said 2,765 patients are in critical condition. Pakistan has called on the international community to hold India accountable for its human rights abuses in occupied Kashmir. In a series of tweets on the International Day in support of victims of torture, Prime Minister Imran Khan said, "Women, men and children have faced pellet guns, sexual assault and electrocution in the occupied valley." Khan said Indian forces' atrocities are well documented by the UN, human rights organizations and international media. He said a continuing silence in the face of India's abuses is against international rights, humanitarian laws and must be unacceptable. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India's lies over a cut in High Commission staff are another diversion.
I mean, baseless. So it's just to divert attention. They have no answers, for the battering that they got in Ladakh, and to quell the domestic dissent. They want to refocus from line of actual control to line of control.
Qureshi also warned India of immediate retaliation in case of any misadventure. And Pakistan has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to register strong protest over ceasefire violations along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said unprovoked firing by Indian forces critically injured a civilian in Karela sector. Spokesperson Aisha Farooqi said Indian forces have continuously targeted civilian areas with artillery fire, heavy caliber mortars and auto weapons. Farooqi said India has so far committed 1,487 ceasefire violations this year, resulting in 13 deaths and critical injuries to 106 civilians. The spokesperson said these violations of international law reflect India's consistent attempts to escalate the situation. She said Indian actions along the line of control are a threat to regional peace and security. Indian troops have martyred 3 more Kashmiris, raising the toll for this month to 43. The civilians were killed during a cordon and search operation in Pulwama district. Police said the operation was underway in Chewa Ular village of the Tral area. Indian atrocities in the occupied valley have sharply increased despite the COVID-19 outbreak. The region has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 327 days. Now, Iraqi security forces have raided a headquarters belonging to a powerful Iran-backed militia in southern Baghdad. They detained more than a dozen members of HEZBOLLAH. The raid was the most brazen action by Iraqi forces against the militant groups in years. The paramilitary forces said those detained were transferred to the security branch of the Popular Mobilization Forces. But a government official denied any such transfer and said they were still in the custody of other security services. The raid follows a pledge made by the Iraqi government to the United States to take tough actions against militia that have targeted U.S. installations. Moving on, Libya's National Oil Corporation says Russian and other foreign mercenaries entered the Sharara oil field to block the oil output. In a statement, it said the corporation rejects attempts by foreign countries to prevent the resumption of oil production. In January, oil exports were halted by Eastern forces loyal to Haftar, cutting off Libya's main source of revenue. But after the UN-backed government made gains this month, the NOC attempted to restart production at 2 fields, including Sharara. Oil fields and export facilities are mostly located in territory controlled by the eastern-based Libyan National Army. The LNA is backed by Russia, the United Arab Emirates and Egypt. The Belgian parliament has adopted a resolution urging the government to impose sanctions on Israel if it annexes parts of occupied Palestinian territories. The resolution called on the government to play a leading role at the European and multilateral level to respond to Israeli plans. Earlier, Palestinian group Hamas warned that annexation of the West Bank will be a declaration of war. The UN has raised alarm bells in recent weeks over Tel Aviv's intentions, warning it could do irrevocable damage to the region's peace. Tel Aviv is expected to carry out the annexation of parts of the West Bank and Jordan Valley on the 1st of July. U.S. Democrats in the House of Representatives have signed a letter to Israeli leaders warning them against the plan to annex the occupied West Bank. The letter says Tel Aviv's plan will push the parties away from peace talks and the possibility of a final negotiated agreement. The letter warns the unilateral move will upend Israel's ties with its Arab neighbors and Europe. 191 of the chamber's 233 Democrats have signed the letter. Earlier, Israel announced plans to formally annex the Jordan Valley and the West Bank settlements, which it has occupied since 1967. In response, the Palestinian Authority has abolished bilateral agreements with Israel. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says UAE and Tel Aviv have decided to cooperate in the fight against coronavirus. The cooperation comes at a time of strong Arab opposition to Israel's plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. In a speech, Netanyahu said the agreement stemmed from intensive contacts with Abu Dhabi over recent months. He said both countries will collaborate in research, development and technology to improve the well-being of the entire region.
This cooperation will be in research and technology development in areas that will improve the health security of the entire region. These are the results of continuous and intensive communications that took place over the past months. This will bring a blessing to many in our region.
Earlier in May, Abu Dhabi-based Etihad made the first known flight by a UAE carrier to Israel, carrying coronavirus-related aid for the Palestinians. Now moving on, the US has blacklisted 4 steel, aluminium and iron companies operating in Iran's metal sectors. In a statement, the Treasury Department said Washington has also imposed sanctions on sales agents of Tehran's largest steel company. It said the sales agents generate tens of millions of dollars for Iran's metals industry. The sanctions freeze any U.S. assets held by the companies and prohibit Americans from dealing with them. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin said Iran continues to use profits from metals manufacturers to fund destabilizing behavior around the world. Tensions between Washington and Tehran have spiked since the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration has asked the Supreme Court to invalidate the Affordable Care Act. The law enabled millions of Americans to get insurance coverage and remains in effect despite the pending legal challenge. In a filing, government advocate Noel Francisco argued Obamacare became invalid after the previous Republican-led Congress axed part of it. It said the act cannot survive once the individual mandate, the guaranteed issue, and community rating provisions are invalidated. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Trump's campaign to rip away the ACA during a pandemic is an act of unfathomable cruelty. Former Vice President Joe Biden also dubbed the move cruel, heartless, and callous. The justices will hear arguments in the case sometimes next term, although it's unclear if they will occur before the November election. Now, Russia says Ukraine remains unwilling to find a comprehensive resolution of the Donbass conflict. This comes after the meeting of the political subgroup of the Contact Group for the Settlement in Ukraine. Russia's envoy to the group, Boris Gryzlov, said the session focused on the Donbass conflict regulation and ceasefire control measures. He said Ukraine is once again stalling the approval of necessary decisions. The envoy said it seems that the main goal of Kiev is to maintain anti-Russian sanctions under any pretense. He said Moscow has reiterated its stance under the Minsk agreement to make the special status for Donbass permanent. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. The death toll from lightning strikes and torrential rains in India has risen to 107. Officials say 83 people were killed in Bihar state, while 24 other fatalities were reported in Uttar Pradesh. They said 44 people were injured as high-speed winds and rains felled trees and electricity poles. Officials said the strikes also caused material damage and resulted in the deaths of some 40 animals. An emergency official said the victims were mostly farmers or homeless people. The Weather Bureau has forecast more storms in India for the coming days. Heavy rainfall has affected over 11 million people in more than a dozen provinces in southern and western China. State media says $3.4 billion was lost in direct damages, while 2.1 million acres of farmland was also affected. In a statement, the Flood Control Agency said rainstorms are expected to hit vast stretches of China from today. It highlighted a high risk of flooding, landslides, and urban waterlogging. The Emergency Management Department of Jiangxi says over 37,000 people have been evacuated in 38 counties. China has had over 20 heavy rainstorms this year, the second highest number since 2013. Now, in Afghanistan, the economic fallout of COVID-19 pandemic has left thousands of people without jobs. To overcome the crisis, the government has hired thousands of jobless workers to rehabilitate groundwater supplies in Kabul. More in this report.
The Afghan government has started a water project to cope with the increasing demand in fast-growing Kabul. It uses trenches to capture rainwater and snowmelt, which is usually lost through flash flooding. For this purpose, Afghanistan is recruiting those who have lost their jobs due to the coronavirus-induced lockdown.
The main goal of this project is to control the surface water of the train in the mountains. Once we dig a trench, then we will plant a tree in it to save the water, and so the tree can benefit from the saved water. Also, a lot of people lost their jobs in Kabul due to the spread of coronavirus, so we have hired them to earn a living and to serve the country.
Planned to run for a year, the Kabul Water Project pays laborers at least 300 Afghanis a day to dig close to 150,000 trenches. The wages are modest, but crucial for survival.
This is a tough job, but I have to do it to earn halal food. Also, I take pride in the reconstruction of my country. This is good for the future of our country.
Experts say Kabul's groundwater supplies have been overexploited. A study shows that the city's groundwater levels have decreased by about 1 meter per year over the past 2 decades.
Since COVID-19 pandemic has stalled projects across the globe, it is also jeopardizing a pioneering northern white rhino conservation project. The project is facing delays as international travel restrictions have forced biorescue to delay some of its key procedures. More details in this report.
The northern white rhino is on the brink of extinction after the last known living male died in Kenya's Ol Pejeta Conservancy in 2018. Once found in several countries in East and Central Africa, its numbers fell sharply due to heavy poaching. The only surviving northern white rhinos now are mother and a daughter, Nain and Fatu, both infertile, making them the world's most endangered mammal. But researchers and conservation organizations have joined forces to save subspecies using pioneering artificial reproduction techniques. Researchers are harvesting immature egg cells from animals and fertilizing them with frozen sperm from diseased males.
Biorescue is trying to utilize the most advanced assisted reproduction technologies combined with stem cell technologies and to produce in vitro embryos which then will be transferred into surrogate mothers and at the end to produce a viable, genetically sound population.
After 2 successful procedures to harvest oocytes in August and December last year, travel restrictions have forced scientists to postpone further procedures planned for May. Scientists said they are under huge time constraints because the 2 remaining female rhinos are aging, which will risk losing the creature.
We couldn't travel, we had to cancel our trips to Kenya, so that actually means we're losing time in our ambitious program. However, we found an alternative to that. Every scientist of our consortium was working national-wise to improve technologies, to make these things better, so that when we go back to Kenya, we will be even more effective and we will be more successful.
Scientists are hoping to deliver their first northern white rhino calf in 3 years and a wider population in the next 2 decades, bringing species back from the brink of extinction.
Now in Taiwan, dragon boat racers have competed in a scaled-back festival amid the COVID-19 fears. Athletes paddled vigorously in unison to beat the drum on the Keelung River. More details in this report.
Dragon boat racing has become a sport in Taiwan now. This festival has its roots in Chinese folklore and is held annually. Taiwanese athletes held the competition amid the pandemic fears. Before the event, spectators have to undergo a temperature screening and follow social distancing measures in the venue. Athletes have to cover a distance of 500 meters while the bystanders cheered the athletes.
The Dragon Boat Festival this year is very different from previous years. In the years when there was no coronavirus, there were traffic jams, many vendors around, and many unions would distribute free rice dumplings. Everyone enjoyed it and ate rice dumplings during lunchtime.
Due to lingering coronavirus fears, the festival was downsized. Organizers scaled back the numbers of athletes in this year's races to 2,400. Last year, there were more than 6,000 participants.
Because we had to keep a social distance due to the pandemic at the very beginning, we were worried that we could not do the training or even join the competition. We even wore masks during the training and sweated a lot to prepare for the race. Later, when the coronavirus was more stable, we did not stop training, tried our best to row, and did our best.
Taiwan's early and effective response has kept the pandemic at bay with just 446 infections and 7 deaths.
European stock markets are trading higher despite grim economic projections by the IMF and resurgence of COVID-19. Industrial stocks have gained about 1.5%. London's FTSE 100 is trading nearly 1% higher as energy stocks tracked gains in oil prices. CAC 40 in Paris has gained nearly 1% as Air France KLM stocks surged over 2.5% after the approval of a €3.5 billion rescue deal. Frankfurt's DAX is trading over 0.5% higher. In Asia, Nikkei 225 and Seoul's Kospi gained over 1% each, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index closed nearly 1% lower as shares of Alibaba dropped nearly 3%. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained over 1%. Now it's time for the weather update. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.